is to look at how managers can save 10 hours a week and have an even higher performing team. And that's what I've been able to help create with many of my clients over many years now. So let's just get stuck into having a look at what we're doing today. Firstly, I just wanted to share a little bit about me. I like my sport. I've played sport for a while. I'm a Collingwood member and have been for a long time. And so I was happy a couple of years ago when Collingwood won the premiership. Sometimes other AFL supporters are not so happy when I talk about that. Also try and keep fit. So you can see me on a fun run on the right-hand side over there, working through some of those. Doing less and less, unfortunately, as the years go on and my body wears down a little bit. And then in the middle, you'll see one of the many groups that I've worked with on leadership. And that was a 5-day residential leadership program. I'm over on the left-hand side. I mean, it's really become my passion to focus on helping leaders to be more positive and more confident and therefore have a more positive impact on the groups that they're involved in, whether that be at work or in the community or in sports. Because what I really see as I'm talking to people is that when you have got a really good and positive leader, they create a happy and satisfied team, and that creates a very positive work environment or group environment or community environment. And I want to create more of that by helping more leaders. So a little bit more about background. I first became a manager in my late 20s, just thrown in the deep end, as many people have been, didn't have a lot of training initially, made many mistakes. I was improving through trial and error, just trying to figure things out myself. And I thought I was going pretty well, but I wasn't doing as well as I thought I was. And part of trying to get that all right was putting in long hours. And I did that for quite some time. And eventually I got some really good leadership training and some coaching support around that. And I improved more in just a year or less than a year than I had in the previous 7 years of being a manager with that training and that guidance. And then as I was improving across that year, other people started to notice the changes and they started to ask me what I was going through and how I'd made those changes and how I could help them as well. Then eventually, after nearly 20 years in corporate, I stepped out and I became a full-time leadership coach and leadership facilitator. It's about 15 years ago now. And so I've run lots of leadership training for over 1,500 people and individually coached over 300 managers. And many of those have been able to work less hours and create a much more balanced life and still get promoted, earn more, hit their targets and have a higher motivated team, and also increase their own job satisfaction around their job and also their career. So it is all possible, okay? And it's one of the things often people ask me as I'm going through this and as they're looking at getting some coaching, is it like, to be good as a manager, does it mean you've got to commit to really, really long hours? And it doesn't have to be that way, even though at times it can feel like that. So as I said, I've worked with many managers, run many courses, and what we're seeing in the workplace now through my experience, through the research that's out there, is unfortunately not a great picture. What we're seeing is that there's low engagement right through most organisations, and managers are even less engaged than the average score for the average employee and staff. Okay, so something really needs to be done to get both staff and managers more engaged. Burnout is the number one reason, according to the research, that managers are less engaged, just how much work they've got on, how many hours they're working, and the pressure associated with that. Okay. So overwhelm is a key part of that, with over 70% describing and experiencing ongoing work stress. So it's a consistent problem. And one of the challenges here is that most people, like I was thrown in the deep end in terms of going into their team lead, their management sort of role, and over 80% of managers feel that they weren't really set up for success, that their organisation could have done a lot more to help them be successful in their role. Okay. So one of the first things that I want to do here is get you thinking about how you're going, what's happening for you. This is why I encourage you to come off mute and share what's happening in your experience, or type into the chat. Okay, so the first thing to think about is, how do you think you're performing now? Giving yourself a rating out of 10 for you in your role in the area of management and leadership, where 10 out of 10 is you at your best. It's not perfect, right? It's possible, it's achievable, it's you at your best. And then 1 out of 10 is nowhere near your best. Okay, so just take a moment to reflect. Where are you at now? What have you been averaging in terms of your performance over the last year or so? Give yourself a rating out of 10. Okay. So thank you, Ian, sharing there. Appreciate that in the chat. And we'll see, I'll give some a little bit more information on what many others have shared as well, as I've asked this question to thousands of people. So the next thing I want you to think about is, how are you going with the hours that you work per week? Okay, rating it out of 10. How satisfied are you that this is the hours that are ideal for you from a whole life perspective, from a work-life balance perspective? 10 is everything is ideal and balanced and, again, achievable. 1 is that you're working crazy hours, much more than you would like to. So have a think about that. Good, we've got some good answers. We've got some responses coming here through the chat. Appreciate that. All right, good. So we've got some different scores, some people pretty happy with the hours. So that's something for you to think about. And of course, there's always the opportunity to think about, how did you come to your scores and what would you like to be different? What would it take to make it a point or 2 higher, unless it's already 10? Okay. And then what I also want you to be thinking about is, do you know what to do to get to be 9 or 10 out of 10 with your performance, or to change your work balance so that that can get to be 8, 9 or 10 out of 10? Do you have all the tools and the resources? So think about that. And then the second part of that one, which is we can talk about a little bit further down the track, is, how well are you using those resources? All right. So it's an interesting view that you can create with this perspective about how you're going, how are your hours and work-life balance going, and then what support and tools and resources are you getting. And I can see that there's some variations in the scores that you're giving. Thank you for putting all of that into the chat. Okay. So keeping that in mind as we're working through, and again, please feel free to jump in and ask questions at any time. So when I asked people about this, what I found is that over 80% of managers rate themselves somewhere between 3 and 6, and that was quite common today. Okay. And yet, almost every single one of those wants to be 8, 9, or 10 out of 10, right, and how they're performing. And work-life balance comes into that. And yet they don't know how to get there. So that last one about the tools and the resources and the support is often the lowest score on that triangle of questions that we had there. So this is what it looks like. Okay, what's happening at the moment. A lot of people are down at that 3, 4-ish, and their confidence is low. Right? Sometimes there might be a sense of imposter syndrome. Right? They have a high workload and they tend to be taking this high workload on themselves. They're not getting enough time to be strategic and think strategically, or to really develop others. And it leads, or they're feeling like it could lead towards burnout, right? And then they start to worry, and maybe they choose that it's easier to leave the role. And then there are some that are in the middle, okay, up to about 6 out of 10. Where sometimes their confidence is okay, but sometimes it drops off depending on what's happening. So it's a roller coaster. Okay. Maybe there's a little bit of training and support, but there's not enough for them to really change habits. So they fall into the old habits quite quickly. They try and do some strategic things, some more effective things, and some elements where they're developing others, but they don't quite become very effective with doing that. And they still feel stressed and overwhelmed and a little bit unsure about where career direction is going. Now, ideally, what should be happening is that organisations and individuals should be creating an environment so that the managers have very high confidence. They're engaging and empowering their team members and developing them, and yet still at the same time being able to hold them accountable. Right? As a manager, as a leader, they're adding strategic value. So getting away from just trying to cope with getting things done every day and really stepping back and being able to add strategic value and be proactive rather than reactive. And that's ideally where people should be. That's 8, 9, 10 out of 10 as a leader. And yet very few people are there at any given point in time in their management and leadership roles. And so what we're looking at here is, how do we help more people to get into that space? How do we help you to get into that space? All right, just checking on some of the comments here. Maturity of the business. Yes. How the business runs, the culture of the business and the maturity of the business has an impact. And of course, then also it's part of the challenge there in how the managers operate is being able to push back and be assertive and challenge some of the ways that the business is operating. Otherwise, even if the business is early days in terms of their maturity, if they keep burning out with people and managers, that's not going to help their growth forward. So here's some key things that we're going to be talking about, how you can save some time. Firstly, we'll focus on some quick wins around meetings, around email, and then we're going to look at some more intricate things around capacity and to-do lists, and then we're going to look at leadership effectiveness and how you can achieve things through others. Okay, so we'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. Yes, and definitely, Ian, some of this is about managing up and setting boundaries, okay? And being more effective in how you're dealing with your manager and some of the other stakeholders and senior managers. So let's look at, firstly, some quick wins, some quick ways that you can save time each week, looking at meetings. And when I'm working with my clients, usually we can save 3 to 5 hours, especially in medium and larger size organisations, by reducing how meetings are being run and how many meetings you go to. Okay. So what I find with most people, most managers, is that there's lots of meetings to go to, and they tend by default to accept most of or if not all of the requests for meetings that are set up. One of the key things to do is really start to think about, how many meetings do I really need to go to, and be more assertive about pushing back to say no to attending some meetings. And interestingly, that's a challenge for a lot of people. Okay. And then the other part of the challenge is also the concern about the fear of missing out. So if I don't go to the meeting, what will happen? What will I miss out on? Okay. So it's about working through that process so that you can be much more effective and be able to let go and stop going to some meetings. Most of the time you can find 2 or 3 meetings a week, which immediately can save you 2 to 3 to more hours. Okay. Other elements around meetings are about starting and ending meetings on time. Okay. And when you're running them, definitely, and even having an influence on that when you're not running them, because that's another area where you can save another 1 to 2 hours a week when meetings are run more efficiently, rather than starting late, going overtime, and not getting through the things that you should get through while you're in the meeting. And one of the ways you can look at that is changing the duration and not having the default that's set in Outlook or whatever the tool is that you're using, and having meetings, for example, that run for 20 minutes instead of 30 minutes, or 45 minutes instead of 60 minutes. Okay. Just changing that up to get people to focus on what you want to achieve in the time that's available for the meeting. And there's plenty of information around how to run effective meetings. And when I do those sort of training, most people know what they need to have an effective meeting. It's just that they're not implementing it. So thinking about things like being really clear on the purpose, having a clear agenda, and understanding for the people attending the meeting, what role are they expected to play? Okay, and making sure there's action items coming out of a meeting. All right. Many times I get people telling me that a lot of people are invited to the meeting kind of as part of, they don't want them to miss out. So come along and share and just hear what's happening, hear the information. Now, sometimes that might be useful, and other times it's actually not the best use of your time. So it's about thinking through those things. So please feel free to jump in and ask any questions. Let me know, what are your thoughts around meetings? Are you having too many meetings in your organisations? Are these some of the things that you could put in place? Or are there other questions that you'd like to ask about how to reduce time or save time in meetings? Feel free to come off mute or to type into the chat. Does anyone here have a lot of meetings that they go to each week? Okay. Thanks for sharing, Alex, about where the rest of the organisation is at. So that's an ongoing challenge for you to work through. So Ian says, I find the passivity of the team members in the meetings. So Ian, you meaning that that they don't sort of engage during the meeting? They kind of sit there and do nothing?
Yeah, get lots of head nods, but not necessarily a lot of ongoing recognition of what was required of them, I guess, even if you've confirmed it in the meeting. So I think some people just come to meetings and just sit there and completely zone out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's part of the feedback we're getting around the ineffective meetings. So the opportunity and also the challenge for managers and leaders is to look at changing up the way the meetings are run. And what is it that we need to do to get people engaged in the meeting? And the other side of it, as was mentioned partly in the chat here, is if it is a very simple element of sharing information, should some meetings be actually changed to some other form, like a report or an email? But when you have people attending meetings, what becomes really important is to work out how do you get them engaged. And one of the simplest starting points with that can be to make one of the meetings to sit down and say, well, as a group, what do we want to get out of these meetings? What would make it more interesting, engaging, so that you would be contributing and getting something of benefit out of it? Okay. And literally, if you then sit there and everyone says, I don't know what benefit we can get out of having this type of a meeting, then it's an interesting challenge to say, well, should we be having this meeting consistently? And that's something that I often work through with people I'm working with as well. Right. And then there's another opportunity for you as a leader to look at getting others to attend. Okay. And what that can mean is saving some time for you, but it's also perhaps giving other people in your team exposure to different people, different opportunities, different settings, so they have that opportunity to grow and develop themselves, get some more learning and exposure. So Ian, sounds like you've already taken my advice and cancelled those meetings, which maybe has given you back some time already.
Yeah, it's given me back some time, but I haven't found an alternative vehicle yet to get what I'm looking for.
Okay, and I mean, we've got a minute here. So what is it that you are looking to, that you want to get out of these meetings?
Yeah, just a tiny bit of context. So the culture of most of the team members in the team and the way our organisation works is very much one of being reactive.
Yeah.
We've got some very talented people, but the culture of the company has always been set up that, wait until we tell you what to do, and then do it, and then we're going to follow you up. So it's a very, I don't know if this is the right term, but it's almost a parental kind of management style.
Yep.
Of we know what's best, we're going to tell you what to do. That's completely antithetical to my style, which is more one of here's what we're trying to achieve. Bring your talents and bring your energy to that, so that it's not just me being a mouthpiece. We're all getting sort of a mosaic of ideas and suggestions, and we can all buy into that process. But I find because the culture is one of passivity and reactivity, people will sort of nod and go, yeah, I get what you mean, but then the follow-up doesn't seem to be there. It takes a lot of effort on my part to sort of enforce the follow-up, which is what they like and what they're used to.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And what you're describing is very similar to lots of other organisations, unfortunately, and I'll actually get to a few points on that soon. So it's challenging. That the opportunity there for you, Ian, is to continue to persist with engaging with them, and in a way that gets them thinking about the possibilities, bringing up their own ideas. And if you do persist with it, what happens most of the time, once they start to believe in you and trust you and can see that you're prepared to give them some scope and empower them, then they will start to try some things. Okay, you're right. There's a fair bit to work through to get them past their experiences of the current culture of being told what to do, and then wait, and then told what to do next. So maybe one of the things for you to consider, if you haven't already tried it, is some one-on-one discussions. But we can also come back to that if you've got some other thoughts or questions when we get to the question and answer time at the end. All right, so let's move on to emails and how we can also save a few hours a week, possibly, by looking at how you manage emails. And this is one of the other reactive things that I see people doing and people are describing to me all the time, and that is we're using emails primarily, and even to some extent now some of the internal chat and messaging, as our default to-do list and prioritization tool. Okay, so in other words, we do something, we come back, we look at our email, we read those. Based on what one of the things we read, that's what we decide we should do next. Okay, now that is very reactive, and it's unlikely for us to be efficient when we're doing things that way. Okay, but it becomes a habit very easy to fall into because we're trying to keep on top of our emails and trying to keep responding back to all of the people that send us all of these dozens or hundreds of emails. What we need to do is look at it differently and really look at email as part of the communication tool. It is not a prioritization tool. Okay, so yes, we've got to be able to work through our emails. So by changing the focus to processing emails in blocks, okay, rather than always going back to emails and deciding what we do next, processing it in blocks of time is the best way to approach it. And essentially what this is like, for those who remember years ago, getting physical mail. Okay. What we used to do before email, for those who are too young to remember, is that we'd get the physical mail delivered at a certain point in time, we'd get a bunch of it, and we would look through it, sorting things into different areas. If it's not something we wanted to do in the moment, and it wasn't any use to us, it'd be thrown out. If it was something that could be interesting, we wanted to read a bit later, it would be put aside. If it's got to do with something that we're working on, then it would be put towards that project. So we would put it into our system of how we're going to do things, or our planning, and it goes into those systems. And then we've processed the mail, and now we're looking at putting into the time around the specific things that we want to get done. And that's what we want to do with email as well, okay? So that you're constantly using your own prioritization rather than letting what email you get be the point around choosing your task that you'll do next. The other thing to do is to create rules around emails so that you can reduce the number that are sitting in your inbox. One of the ones that you can look at, for example, is that when you're CC'd on emails, get that moved to a different folder. Okay. Now you've got to set up a little bit of communication around that so people know, and it does depend on the email culture within the organisation. Okay. But my clients talk about having a huge change in how they manage email by taking just the CCs out and putting that in a separate folder and letting people know that if you're CC'd, then that's something you'll get to at a later point. And if anything's urgent, you've got to send it to me, or even preferably make contact by phone or come and talk to me. Okay. So there are other things that can save time with email, and often that could be 1, 2, even 3 hours a week. And also you're being more effective in what you're focusing on. And the next thing that's really important for us to look at is your capacity, how you go about actually planning your effectiveness. Right? And what the research shows us is that to-do lists are not very effective this way. Okay, so they don't really work. And so what you should be looking at is knowing and really always having clear your longer term strategic objectives, up to about 2 years these days. And even if it's just a year, and then broken that down into some key targets that you're thinking about as milestones that will get you to achieving your target over the next year. And then what we should be doing is building that into a planning system and planning weekly. All right, not daily, and avoiding to-do lists. So one of the biggest downfalls with to-do lists is that they get very long very quickly. And that can tend to put more stress and pressure on people. That's what most of the research finds, that people describe as their to-do lists are long. And they go over several pages, or some people who are rewriting them find they're rewriting the same things often, and that doesn't feel like they're achieving what they want to achieve. So instead, think about planning weekly and looking at blocks of time, right? And also having the flexibility to be able to move those blocks around depending on the unexpected stuff that comes up. What you're also looking at here is planning so that you can make sure that you're thinking about your whole life, and you're also thinking about the hours that you want to work and considering what's actually going to fit in to the time that's available. To-do lists don't do that. It's just a list with no sense of when or how you're going to do it or how long it's going to take. All right? So planning by week in blocks of time gives you a much greater sense of what's actually being able to fit in. What that does is it gets you thinking about choosing what's most important, but also consciously choosing what not to do and what is not going to fit in, instead of always adding something to the list and trying to catch up. Okay. So that's a really important part. And by choosing not to do some things, and that could be over a week, you're pushing it back, or that could be renegotiating about whether these things actually get done or not, then you can save another 2 or 3 hours a week by choosing not to do some of these things. Okay. And then you want to get into the habit of having a weekly planning process. Right. And that involves some of the things that we've been just talking about. Now, the next part, and please feel free to jump in and ask questions again as you have been doing. We'll move over now to looking at the management and leadership side. Okay, and this is some of the things that we've been talking about and coming into some of the chat. Now, if you or your managers are thinking and saying it's just easier to do it myself, and when I do it, I know it'll be done right, then that's essentially sabotaging you from being at your best, or sabotaging themselves from being at their best as a leader. Here are a few more traps that some of the leaders fall into. Okay. Protecting the team from failure by stepping in and fixing the situation, taking over, or fixing their work, bringing their work up to the standard required. And Ian, you sounds like you might recognise some of this in the culture in your organisation. Managers giving the team members all of the answers to all the questions that they come to them with. A team member comes to the manager with a question, and the manager gives them all the answers. And then the managers tell people exactly what they need to do, everything they need to do, what they need to do specifically to complete the tasks. And at first reading through this, you look at it and go, well, yeah, isn't that what a manager should do? Doesn't it seem like the right things to be doing? Okay, but actually they're not. They do logically at first look seem to be the right things to do. But when you do these things, what happens is that everyone in your team becomes reliant on you as the manager to drive everything, to have all of the answers, to bring the work up to standard. Okay, and so they become more and more reactive. They give less of themselves. Their performance sits at some okay level standard based on how much you're telling them the answers and driving them and reminding them to get things done. And that creates a lot of extra work for you as the manager. And it's going to lead you to having extra hours, overwhelm, overwork, and potentially burnout, and also have a significant impact on your career progression and direction. Okay. So Alex is talking about how he sets up to have people empowered and take on responsibility and accountability, which is exactly what we want to be looking at here. So I'd be interested to know how well that's working for you there, Alex. That's exactly what we want people to be doing, and that usually becomes more effective and saves people more time and creates a better environment. So I'd be interested in hearing more about that, because that's exactly what we're talking about here, and is leadership effectiveness, getting things done through others, by building trust and by empowering your team members. Okay. And this is where, coming back to Ian's situation, most people have a situation where someone in their team or throughout the organisation, there's been the experience of the manager doing things for people or telling them exactly what to do. And so as part of this building trust and empowerment, it's about figuring out a way to turn that around so that they do get buy-in and engagement and they take on the responsibility themselves. Okay. Now, the interesting things is that when you try and put this in place and you stop doing and fixing and telling them what to do, and you persist with the building trust and giving them an opportunity to empower them, and showing that you're interested in their thoughts and ideas and you're encouraging them to try things their own way, right? Then when you eventually break through and they start doing these things, okay, they step up and they're much happier, and then they become higher performing. It takes a bit of effort to break through that initial barrier. Many people have been surprised that I've worked with at how much it changes how their team are feeling. Okay. All right, we'll come back to Alex's point there. We might talk about that a little bit further, because it's not going as well as he would like it to. We'll come back to that. So it does take some effort, and it creates a more positive environment. And also what it does is it creates an opportunity for you to think about the succession plan, which is actually really important for your career progress, okay? So if you want to create different career opportunities, it's important that you've got people growing and developing, so that if you move to a higher role, if you get promoted, then there's people coming through who can fill your role. Sometimes you miss out on promotions if you haven't got that succession plan in place, or at other times they might give you both roles, which is a big challenge. And then you've put the responsibility on you to try and figure out what you should do next. Okay. So that's an important part of how you can save some time. When you get people that are being empowered and trusted, then they're more proactive and higher performing, then you actually need to do less as a manager, and they're performing at a higher level. One of the ways to accelerate this is to make sure that you've got proven leadership tools, and you're not trying to do this by trial and error and shooting from the hip, trying to create the best effective solutions as you're going along. All right. So a few things to think about here as to how you put all of this in place. You've got some topics there which has got some quick wins, which you could do quite quickly, and then some other areas that takes a bit of effort and persistence and support and guidance. So you have a choice to put some of these things in place. And it's also important to think about, what would it cost you if you don't change? Okay. If you keep going, you or others in the team, is it about burnout, missing out on promotions, not feeling like you're progressing fast enough, like you're in the same place in another 2 or 3 years' time? Is that what you want? Or you could get some help around this situation and look at fast tracking what's happening for you with your leadership development. Okay. So you could have consistently high confidence, have the high performing engaged team, multiple career options without having to work the extended hours. So here's just a couple of people. I'll let you read through Alex's comments, his experience being in the coaching program with me. Then we had Jude. Interesting and good example. I've had many people similar to Jude, very intelligent person, done a lot of training in MBA, but was still missing some of the subtle techniques in leadership that would help to make a significant difference. But he was able to find them and apply them through the coaching. So have a think about how much would you improve or someone in your team improve with 12 months worth of leadership coaching. And I've been able to create a way that this is much more cost effective than the high level executive coaching packages that are out there at the moment. So here's an outline of the program that I run, that I've been able to create with this cost effective process. And it's an outcome-based process. So it's really about looking at helping you to transform. It's not about giving you a whole bunch of information and after a little while saying, off you go, like training courses, and best of luck implementing it. But actually with you all along the way to implement it. There's online video-based training. There's active worksheets submitted for feedback to help you develop. There's some one-on-one coaching as well as weekly group coaching sessions for 12 months. And you can have a 30-day test drive, so you can jump in and try it out for free. If it's not for you, that's okay. But I'm with you all the way along, helping you to implement it as you understand and learn these and apply it to your specific situations. And it can be as little as 2 hours a week, and you can be at your best in just 90 days. So there's a complimentary coaching session that you have as part of this process if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about how the program works. But now we've got an opportunity to get some questions. Come off mute, ask some questions. I'm keen to go back a little bit to Alex's comment about how he's been trying to empower people. It's not going so well. So I'm just going to read through that comment. Anyone else, please jump in with the question about anything that we've covered today or any other part of leadership that you wanted to ask about.
So thanks, Michael. Sort of a question,
yep.
Probably not necessarily exactly aligned to what you've been talking about today, although it's certainly allied. If you find that you're pushing against this culture all the time, and, you know, without putting a label on it, like burnout, frustration, whatever you want to call it, when do you figure out it's just time, maybe I should go somewhere else that's more aligned with my beliefs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's no simple black and white answer to that. A starting point is to get really clear on your values, to either do some activity around that, or if you've already done that, to reflect back on that, and then to look at what are the types of values that the company is actually living. So not necessarily the values that it describes, you know, on the posters on the wall or on the internet, but what the actual behaviour is, and just see how well they match. Okay, and if you're seeing some really strong conflicts, and you're seeing there's not much of an area where they are actually connected and matching, then that's a strong indication that you need to look at another organisation that has values and a culture that's going to match what you're looking for. If there are some things that do match up well, then it becomes about looking at, okay, so there's some things that are working well, should work well for me in this organisation, and how do I work through the things that aren't working for me? And how much also do I want to take on the challenge, if you like, of looking at how could I possibly change some of the behaviours and the culture in the organisation? But there does become a time, obviously, that if it feels like you're just banging your head against a brick wall, then it is time to move on. It's in this situation, obviously, it's difficult for me to get an understanding of how long that takes. But is that useful for some guidance?
No. It's kind of confirms what I thought. You know, this hasn't been just an overnight venture. I've been sort of working on this for a number of years, and like a lot of people, you sort of take all the lack of progress on personally, that it's my issue, which in many cases it is, right? So you could always be doing something different, or try different approaches. I've tried that a number of times. I've even got to the stage where the meetings were becoming so ineffectual that I just said, look, we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing that meeting anymore.
Yep.
We'll do something else. And it was tantamount to the one-on-ones that you talked about, where it was, we'll have situational oriented meetings rather than just cadence meetings. So more aligned to outcomes, things we're trying to achieve, than just, hey, the clock's ticked around to this time, we've got to have a meeting. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that approach better. And the other thing I try to do and try to implement here, and it's a pet hate of mine, is not have too many discovery meetings. And by that I mean don't get everyone to turn up to the meeting and go, here's a surprise. I'm just going to spring something on you and I want you to participate. I'd rather share, let people know what I'm trying to get out of a meeting ahead of time, so they actually come to the meeting, hopefully, ready to engage, rather than just, what am I going to learn? I don't want, it's not a lecture. I don't like meetings that are lectures. I'd rather sit there and get interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those things make a difference. And with the clients that I've worked with, where they've been able to build some momentum to create change, is where they've made some adjustments, like you're talking about, Ian, and then the team are feeling more positive, so they're starting to contribute more. And then they get positive feedback. You give them positive feedback, or you create in the meetings a way where you share positive feedback about how people have helped each other, or something like that. And so then they feel better about that, and they feel more encouraged to try and come up with some more ideas and get more positive feedback, and have more useful interactions.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder, Michael, that I probably don't do that as well as I should, about giving that feedback on things where people do. I think I do, but I could always be better, right, at getting back to people and letting them know how they go and where that's going. Part of the problem in my industry, I think, is that there's such a quite often a disconnect between perceived input and then recognized outcome. So sometimes there's not that direct dopamine feedback from people. They go, hey, I did a good thing and here's a reward. So that's something I've got to work on as well, is how do you keep that momentum up when they're not getting that that external outcome feedback, in a short time frame.
Yeah. And so that's a really important one that's also lacking in most organizations and situations, that people don't get anywhere near enough ongoing, simple, specific feedback. And yet we know clearly that when we get positive feedback about something that we've done, we're much more likely to repeat it. Okay. So, if somebody comes up with an idea, then it's about not just thanking them for it, but also giving them really clear, specific feedback. And then if they start to implement part of that, it's about giving them a little piece of positive feedback to give them that encouragement that we appreciate what you're doing. And that's the way that you start to change the behaviours. Otherwise, the behaviours will revert back to the habits that have become ingrained.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Michael.
Pleasure. And there's specific ways that you need to structure the feedback that makes it more effective too. So coming around to Alex, I'm reading through the message there, and I'm keen to hear a little bit more if you want to share, because it sounds like you're setting up about empowering people and having process and people who own the process and accountability. And then I'm hearing that it's not working well because it's the profit-focused section of the business delegate back to the OH&S. And so I'm a little bit confused about how they're connected.
Can you hear me? There we go. Cool. Fantastic. So basically in my role, I'm health, safety, environment, quality, and I'm that kind of department head. It's an industrial company working primarily with the construction industry. And it's doing things like setting up procedures and processes to enable the project managers who are in the profit-focused parts of the business to ensure that they are following through on their contractual and regulatory obligations. So things like putting together safe working procedures for the guys out on site, making them project specific, that kind of thing. And a lot of the times what I'm finding is, even though I've put together, massive amounts of documentation or paperwork, or making information very easy and simple for project managers to follow and implement, instead of taking this information and saying, look, I'll integrate it into what I'm doing, what the project managers do is go, well, this is a safety problem, we'll just handball it to safety. And they're then backed up by for example, the steelwork division manager. He'll then turn around and go, oh, well, this is a safety thing, so we'll handball it to safety. Whereas I have no context of what they're doing, how they're doing it, what the scope of works is, any of that. So because we've got a corporate culture which is very much aligned around, let's say, the handballing of activities, and project managers are empowered to do that because their time is considered to be more valuable from a profit perspective, that I don't get to work on the more strategic things which I should be working on, to make sure that the business is set up and secure and protected from incidents or regulatory or legal issues. I keep having to put out the spot fires of other people just handballing their activities. So it even leads to me not being able to, properly pay attention to my own team and develop my own team. And it's become quite detrimental across the business, and morale in my team is not great, but it feels like it's out of my hands because the rest of the management team is happy for the handballing to occur regardless.
That's a challenging situation.
A lot to take in there, yes.
Yes, you're squeezed in the middle there, and I well explained. I understand what you're saying now. There are ways out of this. They do take courage and assertiveness for you to apply some of those. And if you want to have another discussion, I'm happy to talk through it in more detail. We can make a time that suits you. But where I've had other people in similar, not exactly the same, but similar types of situations caught in the middle here, it becomes about setting some boundaries and pushing back.
It's something that I do push back, because I'm very much in the camp of going, look, I've given you the information, I've given you the opportunity. If you want to have a go at it and meet me halfway, I'll help you. But for example, the managing director or the division heads across the different profit centres, they just overrule it. And it's unfortunate in that, yes, I'm in the middle of the stack, but the management team, the rest of the management team, I should say, doesn't have my back.
Right. Okay. And so what in that sense, then what I'm hearing is that your team is set up to do one thing with the amount of resource that you've got, and yet you're doing another thing, which is what the project manager should be doing. So you've got all this extra work. Is that right? Yes.
And then I'm held accountable to both.
Yeah. Okay. So part of the pushback may well start with clarifying about what you're actually responsible for and pushing back on being held accountable on what should be happening on site, unless they want to change that around and create a whole extra amount of resources. And I know it's not as simple as what I'm saying. It's just it's one of the possibilities to consider talking through, and there are other ways that you can approach some of these situations that can open a little bit of a door, and start to head down different directions. And it is one where you would need to be very, very strong and assertive in how you would push back on the situations. Of course, what I'm hearing from you is that if you don't, you're being put in a situation that's kind of a lose-lose. You haven't got what you need to be successful with everything they're asking you to do. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm being set up to fail to some degree.
Yeah. Yes. So that what I'm saying here is one of the first things that you could look at is having strong discussion around that. It's what resources you've got, what you're being asked to do, and then it just doesn't match up.
Yeah. All right. That's useful information.
Great. And as I said, please take down contact details. Happy to have a chat in more detail, to happy to work through that if we would like to.
Yeah, keen.
Fantastic. All right.
Awesome. I've got to run into my next one. So thank you very much, Michael. This has been fantastic.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Alex. Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye. And yes, we've come to the end of time. I'm happy to stay a bit longer if anyone would like to ask any other questions. Otherwise, we can wrap up. And please feel free to reach out and contact me if you would like to talk further. All right. Thank you very much, Ian and Natasha. Great to meet you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great festive season. And yeah, please reach out if there's anything I can do to help. Thank you.